everyone, and welcome to the first interview from the site ThinkFit. Today we will be talking to Mario Tomic. For those who don't know who Mario is, you must definitely check him out. He's the owner of the site Shocking Fit. He's a YouTuber, online entrepreneur, avid reader, science lover, fitness and nutrition nerd, and as he calls himself, a dude who loves to lift heavy weights. He's doing some amazing work on YouTube as well as on his website. For more information about him, I will link everything down below in the description. Now let's start the interview. First question. How important is what you eat both for fat loss or muscle gain?
Right, so how important that is? Well, the way you want to look at it is a really good system that is actually developed by a friend of mine, a guy who's really doing a lot of great research and someone who definitely is a person to follow in the fitness industry. His name is Eric Helms. So he came up with a system that he organized in pyramids, so in different levels of what is the priority if you want to get jacked, if you want to get ripped, if you really want to build a great body. So in his pyramid, number one layer, the foundation, is the consistency, of course, which makes everything work. But as you go above and to see what the actual amounts is of what contributes the most to results, then we're talking about greatly about calories. So total calorie intake determines about, let's say, 50% of everything, and then we have your macronutrient amounts that you're consuming. So these two things will kind of give you about 80% of results if you just hit your calories and macros on a consistent basis. If you manage that, then furthermore you get into micronutrition, which kind of handles itself if you're consuming the majority of your food from whole, healthy, unprocessed sources, very rich in fruits, vegetables, lean protein sources, variety of foods, plenty of veggies. As I said, that's going to cover most of the micronutrient demands. And then we're going into realms of meal timing, meal frequency. This is where things such as how many meals per day you're going to have. Are you going to have an intermittent fasting window? Are you going to have this or that? This brings a very small impact on the total results that you're getting from that, but it can make some people stick to the diet a little bit easier for them, in a sense that they can adhere to the diet easier. And then we have supplements, which play a really minor role. There could be just a little top on that pyramid, which is not so important. And of course, their supplements can make a difference, but only if you are actually deficient in something. So if you're not able to hit your daily protein amounts, having some protein supplements will help you get to that amount. And of course, that is what the supplement is for, is to supplement an already decent diet. And it's kind of hard to patch up a horrible diet with supplements, but it is something that to consider supplementation, depending on what the context of the situation is, depending whether you're deficient in some nutrients that you are looking at. Okay, I'm pretty sure that I'm deficient in this. Common deficiencies are zinc, calcium, magnesium, B12. These things can be supplemented. It's a really good idea to actually do some kind of testing before taking any supplementation and then to confirm. On the other hand, then you have certain things that are kind of a no-brainer, stuff like the omega-3 fish oil and a little bit of vitamin D, I think, is probably useful for the majority of people that are living most of their lives sedentary. So, yeah, coming back to the fundamentals, we're talking about the calories, we're talking about the macronutrient amounts, we're talking specifically about protein in those macronutrient amounts, which is the one that is most important for body composition purposes, where your goal is to maximize the amount of muscle mass you have, and you want to minimize in certain situations, if you're preparing for, let's say, a show, or if you're doing a fat loss diet, the goal is to minimize body fat percentage while maximizing the amount of muscle that you can retain or potentially even build some muscle. So this would be, let's say, calories and macros would be the main ones to focus at. And as I said, there you want to make sure that the 80-90% of your food comes from whole, healthy sources of food that you prefer. So the foods that you really like to eat, and that will kind of handle itself. And how important it is. I know a lot of people will say abs are made in the kitchen. This or that is important, more important. I would say that good nutrition is critical, as critical it is to get exercise, which is a fundamental need of your body. And then it's also looking at sleep. I mean, we can say that that is also critical. I mean, they're kind of, I would almost give them the same amount of importance, because you can't maximize your results without maximizing or without working on all three of them. But of course, if you want to make compromises, in a sense that if you don't care about body composition as much, then of course you can do just a little bit of training to keep yourself healthy, and then invest most of the time into nutrition and get a deficit from that. And in general, if the goal is fat loss, deficits should mainly come from dietary restriction, and then for the other part, potentially adding some weight training would be kind of fundamental. But for an extra calorie burn amount, it's a good idea to do some cardio as well. As for health reasons, there might be benefits there to look into.
Is fat loss determined strictly by what you eat? I mean, a while ago I read a study made by Dr. Lyle McDonald where he ate just sweets and lost a lot of weight.
Well, there's numerous examples of the calories in, calories out in effect. I mean, we're talking about energy balance, and that's something that is kind of a universal law that our human body, I mean, it just applies to us. We can't really cheat the system, meaning that if you're in a negative energy balance, if you create that caloric deficit, regardless of what food you eat, what specific food you consume, you will lose weight, because the body has to burn body fat to compensate, because you're not getting those calories from food. And that's something that is a little bit confusing to people, because they're coming from that paradigm that there are certain specific foods, or that there are certain quote unquote diets that are fat burning. But in reality, what is giving you that weight loss, and that is going to be body fat or combination of body fat and muscle, what ratio is going to be, that depends on your training, on your sleep, on other factors, on protein intake. The majority of that loss, I mean, that's coming from the fact that you understand that is about the calorie deficit. So in that quick example there's a Twinkie diet professor. I mean, he ate just Twinkies, and there's a guy that I just recently read about, he just ate pizzas. That's just food. I mean, in looking at it on a nutrition basis, just looking at what exactly that is, it's just coming down to calories, it's coming down to macros, it's coming down to carbs, fats, protein ratio. And as long as you're in that deficit, you're going to be losing body fat. What most people don't understand, however, is that the energy balance equation, it is calories in, calories out, but what are the components of each side? That is where a little bit people get confused, because they don't see the link between calorie intake and energy expenditure. So let's say by you consuming more calories, you're actually expanding more energy as well. By you eating less calories, you're most likely getting a compensatory response from your body, which is down regulating some mechanisms where you burn less calories. So it is a connected formula with energy equation balance, and that's where most people kind of underestimate the calories in, calories out model, because they can't see the link between how those calories in are affecting calories out, and in that way also how calories out are affecting calories in. I mean, there's a really nice graph of the energy balance equation, or the multifactorial graph of showing how everything is being affected by everything. Then we go into psychology as well. I mean, certain things, the way you think about exercise can affect how much you eat, and things like that. There's a lot of different factors, and but at the end of the day, if you can adhere to a caloric deficit and keep it simple, you will lose body fat. As you're involved in resistance training, you will minimize muscle loss and potentially even gain some muscle if you're a beginner in a situation where you can actually do that.
How would you define healthy eating? What's your definition for this term?
Well, definition of healthy eating, it's a little bit of a difficult definition, because there's a majority of different definitions out there. I would say that whatever fits your personal kind of definition of health and what can keep you quote unquote healthy. The thing is with with the definition, that's one thing what we're struggling with in the nutrition world, is because there's not a lot of specific definitions on exactly what healthy eating is. I like Mike Israetel's recent book that he did on on healthy eating, which kind of went into defining what are the primary factors that are involved in healthy eating. One of my favorite definitions of a healthy diet, quote unquote, would be the 10 Essentials by Alan Aragon, who is a really famous researcher, as well as a guy who's been moving the industry forward by doing his research that kind of contradicted a lot of the stuff. I mean, he's one of the guys who got involved first in discovering the if it fits your macros model, like with Lyle McDonald and with the rest of the crew. So his 10, basically, number one is you respect your personal taste. Number two, you can support your physical and mental performance. Number three, you can cover your macronutrient and micronutrient needs. Number four is you have no unnecessary food restrictions. For some reason that someone told you that the caveman didn't eat pasta, and then you restrict that. So a quick example there. And number five, you respect your own, if you have certain intolerances or allergies, that you take that into consideration. Number six, that the diet is convenient. Number seven, that the diet is affordable to you, so you can be consistent with it. Number eight, that is social acceptable. It's a really nice add-on to the whole definition. Number three, compatible with personal ideologies. So if you're a vegan, I mean, you have an ideology that you adhere to, and that is totally fine. And then you have number 10, which is probably the most important one, which is sustainable in the long term. And that's where we look into kind of all what we currently have available and see what can be the most sustainable approach long term. And I would agree, there's really not much you can add to this definition by Alan. Again, the best diet is the one you can stick to. If you follow these here, and then you, of course, manage your calories, that would be the definition. And I don't have my own definition of a healthy diet yet, but I think that Alan's covers pretty much everything, so I can just quote him.
How to deal with cravings. From my personal experience, I know that if you have been on a fat loss diet for a while, you get all types of cravings, usually for sweets and fast food. How to deal with them?
Yeah, cravings, and in general, I think there's a lot involved that we are not seeing. And why do we even crave food in the first place? And before you can even give a solution to something, it's important to understand why that thing is happening. So looking at cravings in general, we're dealing with a little bit of a mismatch with an environment we live in today versus what we've evolved for. Our human brain is designed to be opportunistic when it comes to food. We will favor high calorie density, foods will favor high fat, high sugar, concentrated types of foods. And one problem with that is that we get this kind of reward when we consume these types of foods, and this is called the food reward hypothesis. This is put forward by a bunch of obesity researchers. One that is one of my personal favorite that I follow, Stephen Guyenet, who's actually about to release a book in 2017, which is really fascinating. You're reinforcing different behavior by indulging in these types of foods. So it's really difficult to actually control the amounts that you're consuming, and it easily becomes a habit. It becomes kind of a behavioral habit where you're now used to getting all that satisfaction from food, and now you have to reinforce that and you seek that again. So it's very similar to, let's say, someone who is stuck in a situation where you're all of a sudden finding yourself hungry, even though you're not hungry. So we're talking about non-homeostatic eating. Non-homeostatic eating is the key kind of what led us to gain this amount of extra weight. Most of the world is struggling with that. At least in the last couple of decades, we can see that happening, right? So the reason, what the scientists said, well, it's about a 300 to 400 increase every single day, right? That's how much more calories we eat. But the problem with that is that why do we eat those calories? Well, number one was that food reward, because foods has become a lot tastier. It has become much more readily packed with best texture available. It's really difficult to stop eating a bag of Doritos, right? It's incredibly hard, right? Even if you are super motivated to do so, you won't be able to. You will have to use your willpower eventually to restrict yourself from eating that food. And that's where, I mean, we have a limited amount of willpower. We can't necessarily do that forever. And then we're dealing with food environment, which is basically that since we're opportunistic eaters, our brain is looking at the barrier. Okay, how much barrier is there to consuming this food? And in today's environment, there's really not that much barrier that we have to find readily available super tasty food. I mean, you can go to any supermarket and it costs pennies to get something really tasty. So it becomes really difficult to stick to, let's say, a normal diet a simple diet when you have all this food around you available. And one trick, quote unquote, that a lot of people are kind of missing out on is simply getting yourself out of that environment, designing your own environment to be the environment where you don't have access to these extremely palatable foods that are basically preventing you you cannot ever control yourself around. And that's something that I would say that is the first reason why we eat when we're not hungry. So that palatability, that reward that we're getting from food. So that's important to understand. And then you can kind of organize your environment to make sure that these foods are not available. Second reason why we are overeating a lot and why cravings, I guess not as much as cravings, but the fact is that we just are more hungry than we should be, is the amount of variety of food that we have currently available to us. So you probably heard the saying, there's always room for dessert. And that's true, because your brain, the way it's wired is that it's wired for sensory specific satiety. So it's going to get satiated with one specific stimulant, while if you introduce a different food, so if you combine, let's say, savor and a sweet, which is a common combination, so you finish your meal and then there's a dessert. There's no problem eating that dessert, even though that first meal, that huge meal, that main course that you had might have left you completely full, right? But in the moment, of course, you went for the dessert, and you can easily eat that dessert, no problem. And as then we move on to the low effort resource cost. I mean, a great example of this is, let's say, you find yourself craving and overeating on peanuts, right? And it's easy to do so if the peanuts are actually peeled, salted, ready to go right next to you, next to your laptop while you're working, right? But if you have them in a shell, if you have them bought and stored somewhere in the kitchen counter, somewhere above there, and you actually have to go there, peel them, like take off the shell, like get all that stuff ready, add some extra salt. There's a lot of effort. There's not that much effort if you're hungry, but there's just enough effort for you not to overeat that food. But yeah, I mean, cravings is a whole science. I mean, we could say that some of it is coming down to stress and boredom. I mean, I think about 40 to 50% of Americans, at least that's where they do the research, of course. I mean, kind of applies to Europeans as well. I mean, when that not living that much of a different lifestyle. About 40-50% overeat when they're stressed, right? So we have to consider the impact of stress on our willpower and how it also influences our cravings for food. I mean, a lot of us have a response when we get super stressed, we crave food. Then again, we crave food when we're lacking sleep. So it's a multifactorial situation that we have here, especially that poor sleep. I mean, if you miss a night of sleep, you'll probably notice how much more you crave for those high calorie, high sugar, high fat foods, that combination of really concentrated amount of calories. And then of course there's habit. You know, a lot of craving comes down to just simple habit, which is basically you got used to eating at a certain time of the day, and then now your body just wants to eat at that time of the day. You kind of fell into a meal pattern, and you just can eat at that time, regardless of the fact whether you're hungry or not. So there's many factors that said here. If we could definitely beat around this for a long time, but I think if we just try to understand the basic fundamental of how cravings are created in general, we can then try to manipulate it through and design the environment. As we mentioned, we can also manipulate the volume of food that we're getting, so we're more full from our diet, so increasing your volume at lowering the calories. So basically going for lower calorie density foods where you're eating a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruits from your diet. You're avoiding processed food as much as possible, which is going to keep you fuller, and then you're going to crave less. And then also we have higher protein diets, which have been generally shown to be inducing more satiety. Then we have something like intermittent fasting, where you're restricting yourself to an eating window. And for most people, I found that this also helps with reducing cravings, because now you're turning yourself into a lockdown meal pattern from, let's say, 12 to 8 p.m., which tends to work well for most people.
What is the optimal training frequency to maximize your results?
Well, I mean, the thing with training frequency and how much you actually need to do is basically whatever your goal is. I mean, it's hard for us to give a cookie cutter recommendation and say everybody has to spend this amount of time in the gym. I want to train 6 days a week, right? You can't get me out of, now I'm so used to it, you can't get me out of there, right? I mean, I feel bad if I don't go. For someone else, it might be 3 days a week and they're perfectly comfortable with that. It's important to really tailor something that you can follow and be consistent with. It's much more important to be sustainable and consistent than it is to be optimal. There's always a debate whether what's optimal, what is the most sustainable, and I'm leaning more toward the side of sustainability, because I know that even if you do a shitty workout plan 2-3 times a week, some random thing that you downloaded off the internet, you're much better off than the guy who did 2 weeks every day with the perfect workout and he gave up. The person that's doing 3 days a week is going to get much better results, because he's going to do that consistently for months and months and years, and he's going to get all the benefits that he can from that approach. And he can build a fantastic looking body and get incredible results in terms of not just your body, but in terms of your life. If you train 3 days a week, I mean, there's plenty of strength training. If you're an active person, that's what I would like to emphasize here is not about the gym. It's not about the strength training. It's not about the squats and the deadlifts and the bench press, unless you're actually a powerlifter or you're actually a bodybuilder. If you're a person who is an enthusiast for health, and if you're a person who's not just looking at maximizing everything, there's a really strong case for adding things such as yoga, adding things such as different types of physical activities where you can express yourself. I mean, you can easily fill up your week with awesome activities that will allow you to manage your diet easier, as well as going to make your life more enjoyable, because now you're planning for things. And that's the thing, when you're planning for stuff, that plan itself, simply having that plan, is going to make you a little bit happier. It's going to give you something to look forward to. And I think people are missing the big picture here, and just arguing oftentimes. I mean, not saying all the people, but there's a majority of people out there that are looking at exercise now as something that is kind of a must for getting these benefits and all these health effects. And what is the minimum effort that I need to put in to get the maximum results out of it? The mindset, the way you want to look at exercise, is more of a fundamental need of a human body. And when you exclude exercise from your life, when you exclude movement and being active, that's where problems start, because you're now not using the body for what it's meant to be used for. You know, it's literally it's a tool. And if you don't use your tool, it doesn't work well. You have to keep it tuned up. You know, you have to keep it working. And with movement in general, I would say it's very easy to become a sedentary gym rat, you know, just going to the gym 3 days a week, and then all the other time spent sitting down looking at a laptop. And the person that's going to get much better results is the person who understands that it's not just about the gym. It's actually about designing your lifestyle in a way that you are taking walks, that you are standing, that you are taking the trash out, that you're not delegating a walking to a escalator or elevator. You just take the damn stairs, you know, park the car a little bit earlier when you're driving to work, so you can take that 10-15 minute walk in the morning in the sun and get some fresh air. And I think these are the facts where we have a lot of room for improvement, and that's something we're missing out on a lot.
Is it okay to drink alcohol, and how to do it?
Well, there's gonna be. I mean, the answer to this, it's a fact that a lot of people don't accept, and that is that there's gonna be some compromise with things in general in life, right? So if you want to maximize 100% of the results in the gym, you basically have no room for stuff like alcohol or cigarettes, right? Especially, let's say alcohol, because that's the topic here. There's no room for that, right? And now it's come down to the amount that is kind of an acceptable trade-off, right? So what is the acceptable trade-off? I would say, I mean, if you go out, if you have 1-2 drinks, totally fine. Absolutely no difference. I don't drink, I have 0 drinks. But if you have 1 or 2, you're totally fine. If you have half a bottle of something, then you're getting problems now. Now you're gonna not impact just that night, but you're also gonna impact the next day and the next probably 2-3 days until you get back on track. And not just in terms of training, but also in terms of your focus and how productive you are and how much you're getting out of life. You're getting a lot less effective hours because now you've induced something that is toxic to your body, literally. I mean, it's from the body's trying to get rid of it. There's a really great article, I think, from Menno Henselmans on Bayesian bodybuilding, where he talks about drinking and how to minimize fat gain while drinking. So I'll definitely, if you hit me up later, I can give you the link for this. He talks about that. He gives some science there and how to do that. But what I personally practice and recommend is make sure that you're getting a moderate amount and minimal amount that you can. Don't overeat after you do drink some alcohol, because that's definitely not a good idea. Your self-control and your perception of satiety and hunger is completely skewed and destroyed after your night of drinking. You can probably see those huge lines in McDonald's after a club. That is the time when you go home and focus on something else. And in general, what I see is a kind of a trade-off. What a lot of people are getting from alcohol is something that can be replaced with building a skill set in just being being able to express yourself that way without needing the alcohol to do so. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you're someone who is investing in developing your social skills, if you're someone who is investing in becoming a more social person, expressive, open-minded, open to communicate with a lot of people in a clever way, making jokes, having fun, you don't necessarily need booze, right? You don't need alcohol for that. And that lack of skill set, and it's more not even just a lack of skill set. I think a lot of people are naturally much more expressive and open, but they're simply being inhibited by social conditioning or just the way they're raised or the way they live their day-to-day stuff. You know, if you haven't smiled for 6 days in your office because it's just the way the environment there is set up, it's unnatural for you to go out and smile, is it, right? It's just all of a sudden it's unnatural because it's so much out of your personality. But if you're a little bit more, let's say, expanded in your range of expression, you don't necessarily need alcohol to do so. I mean, what alcohol does is blunts your prefrontal cortex a little bit, so now you're not thinking as much. When you're not thinking, you're more acting through just your kind of primal self, you know, more expressive and less inhibited, less overthinking. So that's for a lot of people something that you can get from just simply practicing social skills, meditation, living a healthy lifestyle in general, going to do some exercise, things like that. You're going to find yourself building that self-confidence, building that self-trust and that expression without the need for alcohol. But of course, it is a social thing. It is a cultural thing. I mean, I might have a glass of wine a year, you know, if there's something going on, and it has zero impact on me. But am I going to go out at every little opportunity, every weekend to get wasted? No, that's not going to happen, right?
And that was all. Thank you, Mario, for this interview.